So I have gathered another list of small scarf patterns for you to knit instead of just a Sophie scarf, and once again, no shade to the Sophie scarf pattern. I think it's brilliant and I'm glad it exists, but let's just say I want you to have plenty of other options to choose from. And this list will be a mix of more well-known designs with the ones that I think deserve more attention, and the difficulty will range from super beginner-friendly to more elaborate and intricate, and most of these patterns will require 300 meters of yarn or less. So let's dive into it, but before we start, as usual, please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss my future videos. Even though I would consider myself to be more of a garment knitter, I still really love small scarves. I adore knitting them and styling them, and I also find them to be a really convenient project to try out new techniques before committing to a larger project, or for example, test new yarns, especially if it's a more expensive yarn, before you invest in a bigger quantity. For example, a lot of patterns I'm going to mention today have cashmere as the main suggested yarn, and I feel like, again, it's a really great way to try out cashmere and knit with more kind of luxurious yarns without breaking the bank. And small scarves are something I would also highly suggest to a beginner just as soon as they're out of their garter squares and potholder phase. And I know that, for example, a lot of people knit Sophie scarves as their first project, and it was kind of their introduction to knitting, which is really cool. But in general, I think regardless of what your skill level is and what your experience is with knitting, there's always something new to learn, and I feel like the sponsor of today's video, the Knitting Circle, would be your best companion in this journey. The Knitting Circle is an amazing online community for all things knitting with instructional videos taught by friendly and knowledgeable experts. Here you can learn at your own pace and always find topics to suit your current skill level and interest, and of course you'll have a lot of fun along the way. Each lesson has step-by-step demonstrations and is complete with expert tips and tricks, and new lessons are always added to keep you coming back for more and help you stay inspired. I, for example, dove right into their lessons on brioche because even though I've been knitting for almost 8 years at this point, I am yet to learn how to knit brioche, and I was really surprised to see that it's not as scary and complicated as I thought. As a member of the Knitting Circle, you'll get unlimited access to hundreds of project tutorials, video demonstrations, and also join a community of like-minded knitters to share your experience and new ideas with. You'll also have access to live events where instructors share their tips, engage with the community, and answer questions in real time. So the first 1,000 people watching this video to click the link in my description will get a full year of premium membership to the Knitting Circle for just $1.49. And this offer is valid for new members only, so please make sure you follow the link in the description, and thank you so much to the Knitting Circle for sponsoring this video. Listen, I'm just done trying to fight this awful December daylight, so instead I'm continuing to film this in the evening, and I just hope it's okay with you, even though you don't really have a choice in the matter, but trust me, it's the best I can do at this point. I'd like to begin this list with two lovely free patterns, both of which are a really fun alternative to the Sophie scarf, and the first one is called French Twist, and it's from the Noble Thread. This is a very simple garter stitch scarf knit tip to tip, and it has an I-cord edge on one side and a really fun scalloped edge with cables on the other. It's designed to be knit with approximately 25 grams of fingering weight yarn, or about 100 meters, which means it's perfect for either leftovers or a mini skein, or just a really odd quantity of fingering weight yarn you might have. Of course, the most obvious yarn choice here would be either sock yarn or hand-dyed superwash merino, but if you don't want to use superwash, even though it will probably work really nicely here because of the squishy garter texture, you can go for something different and more classic, for example, merino from Knitting for Olive or Sunday by Sadness Garn. I feel like this pattern is a really fun detour from just a standard Sophie scarf because of its scalloped edge, and this small of a scarf is a perfect project to, for example, add another color to your wardrobe which you were hesitant of wearing before, or just kind of want to try out in a low-stakes project. So the second free pattern I want to talk about is called Percussion, and it's from Mariah Ricciuto. This one is also a garter stitch scarf, but it's constructed differently. It's actually knit top down, starting from a very small amount of stitches, and then you increase rapidly every row to create a really really wide wingspan. And this construction is one of the easiest and most mindless ways to knit up a simple garter stitch scarf, and it's definitely more TV knitting friendly than, for example, knitting the Sophie scarf. And although this is a really straightforward design, I feel like the eyelets elevate it enough to make it look really lacy, and it looks kind of vintage to me, maybe again because of the combination of garter stitch and eyelets around the border. Well, somebody has decided to join us. Can you hear her purring? That's great. Thanks. Now she's booping the ring light. Thanks. Great. No. Goodbye. The suggested needle size for this scarf is 4.5, which is larger than most of the other patterns I'm gonna mention, and it requires about 200 meters of either DK or worsted weight yarn, and one of the suggestions here is Pergint from Sadness Garn, which is a really popular yarn for garments and sweaters, so if you have some left over, you can use it to make a really fun matching scarf. I also think a lightweight chainette would work really well here, something like Drops Sky, which I recommend a lot in these roundups. Also, of course, a combination of fingering weight and silk mohair if you can handle silk mohair against your skin. You can also adapt it to any other gauge or yarn you want and just use it as a template, much like the Sophie scarf is used. And one more garter stitch pattern I would like to mention is Wendover by Woolfolk. Even though it looks like a really simple straight scarf with petal-like edges, it's actually really clever in its construction and it's not as simple as it seems. So this is a 2-color stripe scarf, and to make sure that the stripes run horizontally from tip to tip, it's knit almost entirely straight, and the shaping is done using short rows and not increases or decreases. And it's also knit in 2 halves and seamed up afterwards, so the construction is really intentional to create this specific shape. It's intended to be knit on 4mm needles, and the main and kind of only yarn suggestion here is Woolfolk Far, which is a worsted weight chainette wool. I haven't used this yarn personally, but I have a feeling that it's probably much softer and less dense compared to some other worsted weight yarns, so perhaps if you want to use a yarn from a different brand or just different yarn in general, go for something DK weight for this pattern instead of worsted. Perhaps Sadness Garn Double Sunday with their really vibrant selection of colors. Also, just a little side note, if anybody has already tried Atlas from Sadness Garn, please let me know your feedback. I'm mostly curious to know how squishy this yarn is, and unfortunately I don't have a physical shop I can touch it in, so let me know. So the Wendover scarf only comes in 1 color, and it calls for 2 skeins of Woolfolk Far, 1 in each color, and there's about 120 meters in each skein. This pattern is also quite different to the other ones in this list because it's much harder to modify for different yarn quantities or a different gauge. You start knitting it by casting on the entire length of the scarf, so of course there's no room for yarn chicken or any guesstimating about the yarn quantity it will take to knit it, especially since you have to make 2 identical halves and seam them up in the end. But I still find this pattern to be really interesting and a fun modern twist on a standard garter stitch scarf. Also, I feel like it's gonna be a really nice way to kind of dip your toes into short row color work without committing to a super complicated project, especially if you haven't tried it before. And next up, I have a classic, the scarf number 4 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. I'm not gonna dwell on this one too much just because it is a pretty popular pattern, but I have really fond memories of knitting this scarf because it has kept me busy on an otherwise super boring train ride. This is a narrow triangular scarf knit in a combination of garter stitch and 1x1 ribbing with also a really interesting textured braid-like border. The main yarn suggestions here are compatible cashmere from Knitting for Olive held double or a single strand of cashmere premium from Lane Yarns, and for the cashmere premium you will need 2 balls, and for the compatible cashmere you will need 3 balls to finish the scarf. I, for example, knit mine in less than 1 ball of BC Garn's Loch Lomond, so about 120 meters, and probably my scarf is a little bit smaller than the pattern intends, but I still find it to be really useful, and it's still long enough for me to be able to tie it around my neck comfortably. Also, I have no idea how it's even possible, but this yarn doesn't pill, even though I wear this scarf all the time, and I wear my sweater made out of Loch Lomond all the time as well. I just don't see any pilling on this yarn, so I'm just really impressed by the quality the more I wear it. And you can knit this scarf using pretty much any non-scratchy DK weight yarn, or even sport weight or fingering or worsted weight. You're not really tied to gauge or size here. You can make it as big or small as you like. And the pattern repeat here is really simple, really easy to keep track of and memorize. You will probably not even think about it after you've done it a few times. And also there is no need to really keep track of your increases or decreases because they're a part of each pattern repeat. And next I'd like to talk about a lovely design called PATISSIÈRE, and it's a proper tiny scarf knit in 2x2 ribbing. It's a straight scarf with interesting textural diagonal line running through the main ribbing. The scarf comes in 2 sizes, and the smaller size is designed to be knit with exactly 1 ball of Cardiff Cashmere Classic, or about 120 meters, and it's gonna be long enough to just be tied around your neck. And the bigger size is the same in width, but it is a little bit longer, so it can be wrapped around your neck twice, and of course it will require a bit more yarn, but still not more than 200 meters. The recommended needle size here is also 3.5, but since this is another pattern which would be perfect for leftovers, you can go slightly up or down in needle size depending on the weight of the yarn you want to use. I love how put together and elegant this design is, but also I have to admit that I used to be really skeptical about the look of ribbed scarves, especially if it's 2x2 ribbing. It just looked really simplistic to me. But ever since I've knit my Ricka scarf, which I included in the last list of small scarf patterns I did, I grew to really love this texture because there's just something so squishy about it. It's really malleable, it's really easy to just pop on without having to adjust it in the mirror. And another really squishy and tactile design is the Espresso Scarf by Katarina Lindhagen. It's knit in brioche with I-cord edges, which makes it extra plump, and it's designed for 4 different sizes, with the smallest one having about 80 centimeters in length and the largest one being a proper shawl with over 2 meters in wingspan. The recommended needle size here is once again 3.5 millimeters, but it's actually intended for a thinner yarn than our previous 2 patterns, so it calls for either fingering or sport weight yarn. I just use sock yarn for this, so for example my favorite non-superwash Mondim from Rich Rosario. But sock yarn is not your only choice for this pattern. You can also go for something warmer, like a nice soft wool. For example, another one of my favorites is Semilla from BC Garn, and it's kind of fingering to sport weight, really soft tweedy wool, which is another yarn of theirs which doesn't pill somehow. And another yarn I can see this in is Como Cashmere from Lamana, which is closer to DK weight, but I would say it's like a light DK. It's just a really nice cashmere and merino blend, and I have it here because I recently got sent a really generous package of Lamana yarns to try out, and I'm beyond grateful. Most of these are perfect for small scarves or just small accessories in general, and I only have 1 ball of this yarn, which will not be enough for this scarf, but I think with 2 balls you can make a small to medium-sized version to be able to really snugly tie around your neck. And I have one more super simple pattern for you before we move on to more intricate designs, and it's the Jackie Bandana by Suzanne Miller. In my opinion, this is hands down the most perfectly shaped stockinette bandana pattern, and it's constructed in such a way that even though it looks really minimalistic, the construction is really intentional here, and it's really elevated compared to just a standard triangular stockinette scarf or shawlette. It's knit sideways, starting with the ties, which are quite narrow and knit in 1x1 ribbing, and then you keep the tie as a border and start shaping your main stockinette triangle with increases and then decreases before decreasing back to the other side of the tie. And I think this construction is really ingenious, and because of its shape and ribbed edges, it will not be prone to curling, which is my main issue with most stockinette bandanas. This pattern pattern only comes in one size and is designed to be knit with approximately 200 meters of either fingering or sport weight yarn. For example, 2 balls of Como Cashmere by Lamana or 50 grams of most fingering weight sock yarns. And the third yarn suggestion in the pattern is Alpaca Silke by Yerbo, which is a yarn I know nothing about. I haven't used it before, so I will be really curious to know your feedback if it's like good or not. I'm also thinking it might be really fun to incorporate intarsia into this pattern by, for example, knitting the border section in a slightly darker color. I personally wouldn't go for too much contrast, but something like a lighter and darker gray would look really sleek, I think, and it also opens a lot of possibilities for using up leftovers this way. Or, for example, you can knit the pattern as intended in one color and then go around it with a crochet hook, or maybe embroider a contrasting border in a different yarn. Since this is firstly a bandana pattern and it's technically suitable for all seasons, you can of course make it out of plant-based fibers, for example, Tin Line by Sadness Garn or Pure Silk by Knitting for Olive. You can also make the ties shorter and just start knitting the main triangle sooner to have it resemble a scarf a bit more. And now we'll start adding some embellishments to our scarves, and we'll ease ourselves in with the Luise scarf from Lamana. This is a free pattern for a small stockinette shawl with a lace border on one side, and it's knit tip to tip with the lace motif knit simultaneously along with the stockinette section, and it has a triangular shape. The pattern has both written instructions and a chart for the lace motif, and it's pretty short and simple, but it will still require some attention until you memorize it. This pattern comes in 2 sizes, which are actually divided into 2 separate patterns, and for the purposes of this video, I'm talking about the E06, which is the smaller size, and it's designed for exactly 1 ball or 160 meters of Lamana Roma yarn knit on 4mm needles, and Lamana Roma is by far the softest yarn I've ever tried. It's just hard to describe how soft this yarn is. Like, I have a sweater from Brunello Cucinelli, a cashmere jumper, which of course I did not pay full price for because, you know, I'm normal and I just got really lucky a couple of years ago, but even that cashmere is not as soft as this yarn, mostly because it's also fluffy apart from being, you know, a cashmere yarn, and it's just like a little kitten. I don't know, it's so soft it kind of makes me want to cry. It also has this really unique warmth to it, but at the same time this yarn is very, very pricey, so I feel a bit hesitant straight up recommending it to you because I know that everybody's budgets are different. If you do want to try it, I promise you, you will not be disappointed. It's really one of the softest yarns out there, and it goes quite a long way. It actually counts as a DK weight yarn even though it's a 20-gram ball. If you want to use a different yarn, I can for example see it in Isar Soft Fine, or one more fancy fluffy cashmere you can knit this in is Brush Light by Cardiff Cashmere. So moving on, this next pattern is one of my favorites, and it's the Flora Scarf by Elon avec Anna. This is a stunning all-over lace scarf with a diamond motif and I-cord edges, and I finished my first one a couple of weeks ago and just couldn't resist casting on another one. And knitting this goes a lot faster than you first expect because it's so potato chippy, and this diamond motif is so addicting. There's always a resting row, and then you just want to finish another diamond, and then you want to finish the chart, and then there's a resting row again, and you're just like, okay, I might as well just get until the end of the row, and like bam, the whole scarf is done. So it's just a really fun knit. The Flora Scarf only comes in one size and it's fully charted, but in my opinion the only tiny downside of this pattern is that at some point your increase rate becomes irregular, so you have to consult the chart and make sure you know where you are in the chart exactly. It's knit on 3.75mm needles and calls for about 200 meters of DK weight yarn, but according to Ravelry it's 400 meters, which is incorrect. It's only because there are 2 strands held together for the main yarn suggestion, which is from, well, Elon avec Anna. They recommend a combo of their silk mohair held together with their fingering superwash merino, and of course in my case the yarn was really different. I've had some alpaca too from Isar, which I wanted to use in a lace project, but even though I fell in love with this pattern, I felt like the recommended needle size and gauge here would be way too open for this yarn. I went down to 2.5mm needles for my version, so my gauge was a lot smaller, and I had to write up an extension of the chart to be able to reach the original size. I'm not really sure how close my version is to the original, but I find that this shape is really convenient to wear, and of course it's not really suitable for winter, but I love it nonetheless, and this yarn is pretty warm, but of course I can't really recommend it for this pattern unless you want to, like me, spend a couple of hours just transferring the chart into stitch fiddle and making sure that everything is accurately extended before you continue knitting. Or actually, I think it can be used in this pattern, but in a combination with a different yarn, for example, Alpaca 1, also of course from PATISSIÈRE, or maybe a strand of silk mohair. And with my second Flora scarf, which I only cast on a couple of days ago, I'm also deviating from the original gauge and needle size suggestion, and I'm knitting mine in 3mm needles because the yarn I'm using is also a little bit thinner than the pattern intends for. I'm not sure you can see it well in this really dark yarn, in this really dark lighting, but I just really love how it's coming out so far, and I'm using a combination of 2 Lamana yarns because, of course, now I have a pretty large selection to choose from. So here's the combo I'm using, and on the top here I have Bandana, which is their merino and cashmere blend, and it's kind of in between lace weight and thread weight. It's really thin and has more than 300 meters in a 25-gram ball. And this one on the bottom is Premia, which is Lamana's silk mohair, and it's quite different from some other silk mohairs I've tried, mostly because it's softer. First of all, it has more silk in it, but I'm assuming because it has more silk, it's also why it's a little bit thinner than the other silk mohairs I've used before. And lastly, I have 3 beautiful cable patterns that I want to tell you about, and the first one is called the Hazel Scarf, and it's from Eugene. This one is a delicate crescent-shaped scarf knit in a combo of seed stitch in the middle and really nice and wide intricate panels of cables around the sides. This scarf is just so beautiful and artful. I'm so glad I found it. It includes instructions for 2 sizes and is designed to be knit on 3.5mm needles with about 250 meters of fingering weight yarn. The texture and gauge here is perfect for many different yarn options, anything from sock yarn to cashmere. I just think it's best to avoid a really speckled or heavily variegated yarn for a pattern like this. The main yarn recommendation in the pattern itself is Le Petit Lamb's Wool from Biche & Bush, which has such a stunning color palette. Also, this pattern would look really nice in Tin Burgund by Sadness Garn, or even a superwash yarn, something like Baby Merino from Drops or Tin Merino Wool from Sadness Garn. I usually try to avoid superwash yarns, but I have to admit that it has its place sometimes, especially if you have sensitive skin or knitting something for a child, or for example, if you're like me and you have a winter coat which clings to any fibers it can find and it's pretty much impossible to lint roll it. So like I can see the appeal of having a really smooth yarn in a scarf. The Hazel scarf can also be easily modified to fit a different yarn meterage, or for example a different size if you want to have it larger or smaller. The shaping here is done inside the seed stitch section, so you only have to repeat the established cable motif, and of course you can omit a motif or add a couple of more if you want to change the size. And another really artful cable design I want to talk about is called the Twisted Twines scarf from Adorable Knits. This one is also a crescent-shaped scarf, but it's knit in all over cables with an I-cord edge, and the cables here look deceptively complicated because it's actually much easier and more engaging to knit them than it first appears, because with cable patterns like this there's always temptation to knit just one more repeat just to get to another cable, finish one more resting row until suddenly you're done, much like with the lace Flora scarf. Also, for a cable design, this one has really economical yarn requirements, and it's designed for 1 ball of Cardiff Cashmere Classic or 120 meters of DK weight yarn. All of the DK weight yarns I've suggested so far apply here as well, but another one I haven't mentioned yet is Lanagato Camel Hair, which is what I use for the Ricky scarf. This yarn is really plump and super soft, and it also has a slight luster to it, and at the beginning I was really afraid that it's gonna pill a lot because it started pilling quite rapidly, but then after a while the fibers kind of brushed into each other and it's not pilling anymore. So at this point, since I've been wearing this scarf pretty much non-stop for like, I don't know, 4 month, you know, excluding the summertime, I can safely recommend it. I think the Twisted Twines scarf can make a really convenient and perfect last-minute gift knit, especially since you can knit it in less than a day and it doesn't require a lot of yarn, so it's going to be easy to just pick up something from your stash and knit a really nice and special gift for somebody. And last but not least, we have the Eugene Scarf from Colibri by Johanna, and it's another beautiful all-over cable scarf. This one is knit straight with I-cord edges and tapered points, and it's part of the Eugene collection, which also includes a sweater pattern and a cardigan pattern, which I mentioned in my cable roundup. It looks so sophisticated and visually interesting, and because of the placement and shape of these cables, it can count as one more ribbed scarf in our list. It comes in 2 sizes, which only differ in length, and for the smallest size, you will need 2 balls of Cardiff cashmere or a DK weight yarn, or about 250 meters. I just go with a combo of fingering weight merino or sock yarn with a strand of silk mohair held together, or for example double Sunday from Sadness Garn. Although you can sort of adjust this pattern to fit your available or desired yarn quantity, I wouldn't go down in yarn weight too much for this, just because the width is set for both sizes and the cable placement is quite intentional, so I feel like it might be way too thin if you, for example, knit it with just fingering weight yarn. I'm also just mesmerized by the bright pink used in the pattern sample, and it's exactly what I was talking about at the beginning, that even though I don't see myself really wearing that color, if I wanted to try it, if I wanted to experiment, a small scarf or a small accessory like this would be the perfect way to do that without, you know, kind of committing to a really big project and a really bright yarn. And this actually concludes my list for today, or for tonight, I should say, and thank you so much for sticking around until the end. I really appreciate you being here and watching, and as always, please let me know which pattern you liked the most, or perhaps you've knit some of the patterns I mentioned. I would be really curious to know your feedback in the comments. I hope you found this list inspirational, and if you did, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more if you haven't already, and also check out the original small scarf pattern video I did if you haven't seen it. I also sincerely hope that this is not my last video of 2025, because unfortunately I have to report that I'm still mind-numbingly busy with my day job, and it has been absolutely chaotic. You know, working in luxury retail and shipping is not fun, especially during the holidays, but I'm trying my best to make sure that I keep making these videos for you. And if you would like to support the channel, just sharing this video with a friend or leaving a comment or making sure you're subscribed is enough. If you have any suggestions about what you would like to see on my channel, you can let me know in the comments or on Instagram, or even email me. I would love to chat, and thank you again for being here. I wish you happy holidays, happy knitting, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.